Awesome. So we'll get started. And Brad, I didn't mention this, so I'm from Montpelier, so we've kind of lived through a bunch of flooding recently. And Doug's from Morrisville, not far from Oxbow. Just moved there, so knows the site pretty well. So yeah, what we like to do is I'm going to run through just like a little overview of the modeling project we're working on with Tori and her team and our team as well, and then we'll focus in on the Doug's going to focus in on some of the modeling he did for the Oxbow. This is a map showing the full extent of the model. You can see this is the Lamoille Basin, Hardwick, Wolcott flowing downstream all the way out. And then we did Fairfax in Georgia. These little red outlines, we've had this model growing for several years now. We've added in and Morrisville's been a part of the model for a long time, but we've been improving the data quality and the level of detail. Um, and the great thing of the model is as things come up, whether it's a bridge design, floodplain restoration, whatever you're looking at, you can use this model in the future. Um, you'll have this resource and the county planning commission is going to hold this.
Terrific.
Um, here's a profile. This modeling effort is a little unique. You don't often get basin scale models. So this is Arrowhead Mountain Lake and down in Fairfax, and then this is 60 miles upstream in Hardwick, and the model goes up even a little further. So it's a very long model. A bunch of the tributary main tribs are getting built out, and you guys are kind of right in the middle here, and it's really important to kind of you can kind of see the slopes of the river here, and you're all in a spot. This is kind of where you have kind of a couple dams at these steps. Wolcott Dam, Morrisville Dam, and then you're about a 0.1% river. So pretty flatter river in this location. Actually, I just realized it's not. Oh, there we go. Get a little bigger. Here's a bird's eye view, plan view of of the model setup. These green lines are cross sections, so that's where we have our topographic information, and everything goes into one cross section and down to the next, and the river's flowing right to left here. Here's kind of the floodplain off Leper Road, and here's Oxbow. Then you have a series of bridges, and then the dams down here at bottom left. So rivers flowing across here. So we put in all the information, different coefficients for land cover, depending on where these lines cross. And then you have the river channel described. And usually LiDAR is used. The state has really good LiDAR now. It's 1 foot contour intervals. And then we either substitute in survey or in some cases like older FEMA data. And so this model is like continually getting updated as data improve. And this is a typical cross section you see in the model. So cut the river, you're sitting in a canoe, you look downstream, and zero is on the left floodplain, and you go across. So this is, a couple thousand, 1,500 feet, almost close to a quarter mile. And then this is the elevation on the left axis. And these dark blobs are like buildings. The scale's a little distorted. That's why the buildings look tall and thin. You see the scale. Each one of these is a couple feet. So this is 10 feet. And then this is like 500 feet. So that's why everything looks really tall and skinny. And what you can really see across the Oxbow in this location is that we're showing the 2-year flood level in the channel on the right side. And you can see that even in a small flood, the lower fields in the Oxbow get flooded. And we kind of have heard this from people and have seen this in some of the drone footage. And here you can see the upper fields. So in a small flood, the upper fields stay dry where the playing fields are. So this is just kind of a typical section. And a lot of this data is from LiDAR data that the state flew, and then there's some FEMA data subbed in here. And then in some locations, we've gone out and surveyed additional channel areas for more detail. So what can the model tell us? Well, this is, again, the bird's eye view. And one of the common tools of the model is looking at the extent and depth of flooding. This is a 2-year flood. So here's the Leper Road floodplain, and you can see, interestingly, that part of that is not flooded. It's a little bit wet, but then you have a lower field that has about 2 feet of water. The lower field in the Oxbow has about a foot and a half. Upper field's dry. And you can see the river channel, how much darker it is. And that means like this river is carrying a bunch of water, even in a small flood that happens every year or so. The model tells us the depth of flow. It tells us the velocity of flows, the extent of the flooding, and then we can also learn about bridges and culverts. So it's a pretty powerful tool to test realistic and even completely unrealistic, way forward-thinking planning alternatives in a model.
So in the July 24 flood, in the Oxbow, we had flooding that went all the way up to our community gardens, which are located like at the top part of this parking lot. The parking lot is raised, and we had about, I don't know, I'd say at least 6, 8 inches of water all the way up to there.
To
So
right here, yeah.
um, if people ask about this map and not showing the full extent from like 2024, um, what kind of what can you provide them for information? Like what?
Yeah. Well, we're going to show you, Doug's going to go through the existing maps that shows all the different floods. This example is strictly for a small flood, a 2-year flood. So
Okay,
way smaller than what you experienced in 23.
okay,
Um, in a second, Doug's going to show you the map of like a 100-year flood. And what you're going to see is you're going to see water all up in here that was much closer to the July 23 flood. That's kind of one of the powerful aspects of the model is we can put in different sized floods. And then you can kind of see, well, in 23, we had close to the 100 or 500-year flood, and that really matches up. And we've done a little bit of validation, and depending on where you are in the watershed, we roughly mapped the 100-year flood. Some places it was a little bigger, some places a little smaller, and we compared it to the high water marks, and we're typically within a foot of what those levels are in the model. So we'll get to that in a second.
thank you.
Yeah, sure. This is a different view. This is if you took a slice down the middle of the river and looked at it from the side, the profile again. And this is a smaller area now focused in the Oxbow, greater Oxbow area. And again, we're looking at this very small flood. This is the flood you're going to see spring runoff, snow melt, or you might see this every other year even. It's the 2-year flood. And this is the flood in a river that moves a lot of the sediment. Um, and then you have the rail trail bridge, Bridge Street, and then you have the dam here. And what you can see in Morrisville is that the water is fairly flat. Again, 0.1% slope in the riverbed, which you see at the bottom here with the black dots. And then these top hat thingies are the bridges and the roads, the deck of the bridge. And then the dam comes up to right here. So you can see a flat surface, the ponding behind a dam that's expected locally. And then you can see that the river kind of pushes through the bridges in this small flood. So not a lot of flooding as you'd expect in a 2-year flood. When we do any work around bridges or dams, like if we wanted to explore taking a dam out or elevating a dam or taking a bridge out, this is kind of where you do it. You take these things away and see how the flood levels change. So it's another tool of the model in case things come up in the future. Um, I think, Doug, I was going to stop here and maybe you were going to take over so we can maybe
Yeah.
answer Brent's question and talk about the different flood levels.
hmm Yeah, so we're just going to run through some of those different floods that we modeled. This is the 2-year again. We've already been looking at some of the results of, and we have a couple of spots we're going to call out
I'm
depths.
sorry.
So as we move up, next one is the 10-year. So, probably what we're seeing every couple of years. Um, you know, happens on average every 10 years or so. And at this point, a lot of the farm field to the north is filling up. So we're seeing maybe a little bit of water getting up onto the upper fields of the Oxbow Park, and depth really increasing where it was already flooding. And this one's the 50-year. So this is starting to be a pretty big flood. Um, I think for a lot of the Lamoille, this is about what we saw in December of 23. Our second flood of the year there. And we are starting to see it get up into the upper fields, um, flooding some of the parking lot at Oxbow Park, and then the farm fields, the Leper Road farm fields, we're calling them, really full and a couple feet of water, even on those spots that were higher. And finally, here's the 100, which which we think is about what we saw in July of 23. We're seeing quite a bit, about 8 feet of water across the lower parts of Oxbow Park, the upper the upper fields all full and starting to get up onto the roads, and then over 3 feet of water on the highest parts of the farm fields there.
What
And
about
these are
July of 2024?
July 24. I don't know, Roy, if we've looked at exactly what that compares well to. What was your experience right around downtown here, Brent?
Oxbow was pretty, I mean, it looked like river rapids on the lower, and
Hmm.
then the upper was there was under about 8 inches of water.
Okay.
I don't know that it got did it get to the community gardens? I think it may have gotten to the community gardens in July 2024, but
Hmm.
yeah, that was my first one here as town manager. So I was I was shocked, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So we also had I'm trying to remember the road, but we had a road down around this 9.55 mark
Hmm.
that was under several feet of water.
Mm.
Not on the town side, but not on the village side, but on the opposite.
Oh, interesting.
Gotcha. Hmm.
Or maybe it was further down. It's hard to contextualize.
Yeah, that's Bridge Street.
Oh, no, it was not Bridge
Mm.
Street.
Right. Okay. Yeah, Bridge Street and the rail trail are on the corner here.
Okay.
Kind of cuts
This is the
off up
rail trail
Jingle
right here.
Dam. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it was further down. It's nearby where Morrisville Water and Lights Dam and um, facility is.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I have the model opening if we do want to m- do any searching around, other than these still images.
Yeah, Doug, I
Um,
think I think that 24 flood, we've heard anecdotally in some areas it was around the 100-year flood, and you know, a little hard to see the scale. Again, we could pull the model up, but it's like this looks like about a foot of water-ish
mhm.
in that parking lot. So pretty close to what you're saying, Brent, is what we're kind of looking at here.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I didn't go down there until things had receded. So,
Yeah.
Right.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, so we kind of have a slide here just talking about some potential alternatives, things we've helped other towns look at, and can be options around the river, where there are flooding issues. The first one, constriction reduction. As we were kind of pointing out in the profile and view, you really see a lot of bridges, and dams obviously really build up the water upstream. And you can see that really well in the profile. So whether, here we have a couple examples in the bottom right. This was a rail trail bridge that we helped replace in Cambridge, just kind of as you're coming into the village of Jeffersonville and next to 15, that it had been about half this span, and we replaced it with a larger span, which has kind of space for the river on one side and then space for floodplain on the right. So as water comes up, it can can get through there and drain faster out of the village. And then the top photo is the dry culvert that we helped install in Jeffersonville as well. So this is kind of, the rotaries in the background there.
Yeah.
As water kind of people would say in our modeling showed that it would back up into the village and then kind of not really have anywhere to go um, until it actually like, got over 15 or would just kind of pond, slowly drain. And so this culvert, is only activated under large flood flows. But when water does back up behind 15, rather than just ponding in the village, it's able to go out this culvert, and get back into the Lamoille. Um, you know, So those are, things that have been identified in other towns. The next thing, floodplain reconnection, is what we've kind of
Sorry.
focused on. That's all right. We can move on to the next one.
No, good.
Well, yeah. So floodplain reconnection is kind of what was discussed in Morrisville. The alternatives that we were handed looked at, the Oxbow Park and the farm fields upstream, whether there were opportunities for floodplain reconnection that might lower flood levels or um, provide additional flood storage. And the next slide shows those spots that we looked at. Um, I know there's been a lot of conversation around Oxbow Park. Roy and I attended the meeting back in May, kind of focused on, you know, what the community, use of the park was and, kind of different visions for what it would look like. And as we've experienced and our model shows, the lower part of the park really, floods pretty often every year or two. But the upper part, it takes those bigger floods, but then it really does flood, the community gardens and the pavilion, areas that, get a lot of use. So just as an exercise, we showed, we modeled lowering that upper part as well, kind of down to the lower part. Um, you know, whether there'd be appetite for that, you know, is another discussion, but just kind of to see what would that do, on the for the flood levels here. And then the upstream side, the Leper Road floodplain, we're calling it, the red shape shows where we've modeled lowering, the downstream portion of the field we found is flooding pretty regularly already. So so we didn't show any changes there, but the upstream portion, in the model we kind of lowered to match that downstream portion to see if that um, lowered lowered flood levels in the area at all. And so what that ended up looking like, so now we're looking at another profile of three floods, kind of the small flood again, that 2 year or so, happening pretty often. The medium is the 50 year, probably about the December 23 or maybe nearing the July 24, and then that large flood is the a really big flood, probably bigger than we saw in July 23. We'll call it 500-year flood. And so this is looking at for each of those flood scenarios, the existing conditions is the blue, which you can kind of just make out where it deviates from the purple proposed lines. And then the purple proposed lines are based on lowering the Oxbow upper field and lowering that part of the Leper Road floodplain. And what we see is there's not a lot of change here. There's actually the most benefit for kind of that medium 50-year flood, but only a couple tenths of a foot. And we think why that is really as you look at the profiles, it comes down to the rail trail and then, Bridge Street. And you can see really well in plan view as well is that it just really has to get into a small area to get through those bridges.
Hmm.
The bridges themselves, as well as, all the buildings and homes that are surrounding the river just really constrict. Yeah, so here you see on the bottom left, you're going from these broad, you know, floodplains where it's really spread out and it's narrowing all the way down into that narrow channel, which, means that, you know, lowering these upper fields and the farm floodplain just don't have that much impact while there's these constrictions downstream. Um, and here's looking at the existing and proposed, and we're calling out the depths. You'll see there's no change to that lower Oxbow Park area, and then there's about a foot and a half additional water on the farm field, and that's because we're lowering it about
Mhm.
a foot and a half. And you can see kind of the color change from existing to proposed. Those areas darken because they've been lowered and the floods are deeper there. And so that's, that's sort of the couple things we've looked at so far. We're also, kind of interested to hear from you if there's other things that, the town is interested in looking at, if there's other bridges or spots that would be of interest.
Um, well, that's why I wanted this recorded so I can share it with our Conservation Commission and others,
Hmm.
and get their input. One one property, it's private property. It's Harvey property directly across from the Oxbow and the bend here,
Hmm.
um, where you see these trees. It's over 20 acres total. Um, and you talk about the constriction down near the rail trail, but I'm wondering if there was any additional study that could be done about somehow that property being utilized.
Hmm.
Um,
Brent, is that right here where I'm circling this,
uh, over further to my left. So keep going.
like
No,
this way?
other way. Uh, Over in that area, yeah,
Okay. So right on the bend.
yeah, and just before it.
Okay. One thing Doug and I were talking about is that the width in this area is pretty shocking compared to like what you see here. And you could just take out bridges, take out the dams, and just see if the water's going to like more effectively move through there. But we don't even think it's going to change a lot because the channel itself is like a trough in there. So like if you said what would you have to do to lower some of the flood levels in here, the answer is pretty obvious actually from the model. It's that you'd have to like recreate some floodplain through this, like right through the community, right? So the river could spread out a little bit and then it would release all this water out there. Something that like it doesn't really make sense, but if somehow in the future all of a sudden there's like this becomes a priority, then I guess any of the properties that get flooded or that you have to like kind of open this spot up right in the downtown area to like let water out of the system. So just again, not a realistic alternative, but something the model tells us that's pretty clear. You also can kind of see the rail trails holding water in. You see how it's like
Yeah.
there's a flat line next to the rail embankment there. Um, so the river at one point before all this got developed, like the river probably spilled out into this field as well. So now that rail line is probably playing a little bit of a flood protection function for the backs of these houses, some of these buildings in here.
Hmm.
While we're looking at this photo, I know there are some proposed plantings and projects at the Oxbow. Um, Even though it might not lower flood levels, could you speak briefly to just the other types of benefits that come with projects like that?
Sure. Um, yeah, I mean the plantings are great for a variety of reasons. I mean so there's a couple factors. One is you want to create space for the water, and two is you kind of want to slow it and spread it out so it doesn't hit like this constriction and build up quickly. And the plantings sort of do that. And then they also help like distribute debris. So sometimes you'll see jams around plantings, and if they're in a spot where like the river could kind of fill up with debris and then go around it safely, then they become really valuable. So like buffer plantings and things like that are really essential. They're a big part of it, in addition to sort of like preventing erosion in the channel moving and trying to create a stable river setting.
Well, do you have any other questions, Brent, or do you want to look at the model quickly, just downstream of the little bit we can see at Bridge Street and the bridges down there?
Yeah, that'd be nice to be able to check that out.
Doug, maybe I'll turn the sharing off and let you pick it up.
Yeah,
Okay.
got it open here. Is this coming across then? Map.
Yeah, we can see it.
Um, yeah, so this is, some of the model, builder that we can actually like move around and look at different size floods and stuff. So if we move downstream, and start looking at, this is another big flood scenario. Let me turn off the cross sections so they don't go. Um, is this is this the area, Brent, where you're talking about some of the road being inundated
Yes.
through here, maybe?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and we do see, that this actually, I don't know if this is if this is what you saw in those floods, but it can actually back up towards these homes here, apartments.
Hmm.
Doug, can you point to the dams?
Yeah, so here's the Morrisville Dam, and you come down into, Lake Lamoille and then move downstream to, here we go,
Okay.
to the downstream dam. And so those dams are in the model as well, so they're
Mhm.
impacting the results here. And kind of see that lower area filling up. Have there been any discussions about, is this something of concern for the town, flooding across the road in these lower areas that we should look at?
Um, I think any place in the village area where there's flooding, there's concern, and
Mhm.
there's interest in looking into what we might be able to do to protect property,
Yeah,
um, as well as not not make, to avoid making decisions, like building or developing areas that could cost the taxpayers a lot of money and then be subject to flooding. But yeah,
hmm
so it's about trying to protect existing resources as well as avoiding um, further development, whether it be even simple infrastructure in the Oxbow.
Right. Yeah.
So this is great data. I've never seen, you know, this type of visual. So this is terrific.
Hey, Doug, could you throw on maybe the 2-year flood and the velocity? I see it up there. Just to kind of, that's one thing we haven't shown, Brent, is how,
Yeah, and I guess just
Oh, wow.
So we've shown these different floods and it is really neat in this visual. We can just scroll through these different flood sizes that we've modeled. Um, See what's under, what it looks like under existing, and then if we do make changes, how it changes. So this is going to be funky in that area because of the dam.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll go upstream. But, Roy kind of talked about how we could look at velocities as well, which can be really helpful, if there's spots that are experiencing erosion, on roads or near homes to understand, kind of what we need to protect against.
Hmm.
As well as, sometimes floodplains, even if they're not making a big change in the flood level, they can help drop velocities nearby as well. Um, so this is what the mapped velocities look like. The blue, the lowest velocities, and the red, highest velocities. Um, and this again is that kind of smaller 2-year flood. We can scroll up a couple, maybe stop at the 100 here, where you see where it's spreading across the floodplains, it's generally pretty slow. You do see some, especially like the lower fields in the Oxbow, you're seeing those higher velocities moving across the fields. Um, and then you see how it really speeds up to get into that constriction into the rail trail bridge and then Bridge Street and on. This is another cool product of the model that can be really
Have you
informing and
guys
helpful.
have you guys had issues? Have you seen issues at the rail trail bridge or Bridge Street? Because this thing is showing like really high scour potential there when all that water squeezes through the bridges.
So I've only been here for 18 months.
Okay.
Tori, um, do you could probably maybe better answer that than I could.
I'm not sure I haven't heard anything about the terrain. I've only heard about the bridge structure itself. Um,
Okay. Interesting. And then Doug, if you pan down to where we were just looking by the first dam,
Mhm.
it's interesting. Like you see how like the blue is like all of that just ponded back, and that's what's getting close to those buildings up there. It's really
Mhm.
shallow for this small flood, but it looks like it's deeper for a bigger flood. So
Mhm.
water kind of shoots at the dam and then hits the wall and slows way down.
well, and thinking more about like walks down there, and Doug, maybe you've noticed too, just like the properties at the backside of the houses along, like just upstream of the bridge from Oxbow, do kind of look like they're like falling in a little.
Mhm.
They look like what, Tori?
Um, just like they're eroding, or like some of the land there is sliding
Mhm.
down.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So this is a terrain view, um, which is from the LiDAR that we helped to build the model. Greens are the lower land, and then the reds and whites and grays are the highest land. So it is kind of interesting to see those homes, how they do. It looks like they had pretty steep slopes behind them that makes sense. They could be vulnerable to
Um,
those
yeah,
to those erosive forces.
So, when I talk about protecting resources, I'm thinking not only of Morristown residents, but also our our neighbors downstream.
Mhm.
And I'm hoping that those communities upstream from Morristown are considering the same things as we continue to look at more improved modeling. Um, and I'm excited that LCPC is bringing us all together to try to work together to find whatever solutions there might be. Um, what is the next phase, Tori, after this?
well, as Roy had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, some of the data from the model is going to be um, housed on the LCPC website. So the town and um, committees and commissions could continue to um, play with the data and explore other areas where projects might have um, upstream or downstream benefits. Um, the This project wraps up on the 9th of December, and there'll be a recovery and resiliency plan with just some recommendations on actions or next steps for communities to take in this context.
Is this
And
going to be shared with the federal delegation? I know that the FEMA floodplain, it was not accurate for the Lamoille Basin, and I think our delegation was able to hit a pause button on an update because of that. I haven't kept track of it. That was several months ago. So I didn't know what the status was of updated floodplain and if it is pending, is there any way like this data can be shared to help make it more accurate?
um, I'm not sure. I know a presentation on this project is also being offered at the next NVEDD board meeting, just in general around the plan and the overall arc of the project by yours truly. But it's, still a very useful tool for the region's communities to use,
Yeah.
even if it's not adopted at other levels.
Um, Brian, we kind of glossed over some details. So we've been in touch with the state floodplain office, and we actually reached out to FEMA's their contractors and they have put out published preliminary flows that update the stuff that came out that people weren't happy with. And the Lamoille was one of the areas where the flood levels were lower than the floods we just saw. It didn't make sense at all. So now they've updated them, and those are the flows we've actually obtained and put in this model from that have been almost calibrated with the 23 and 24 flooding that took place
Oh,
in the
that's great.
region.
That's great because I
So
know that they initially excluded them and it just didn't make any sense. So that's
yeah.
terrific to hear.
Yeah, so I think many of our planning commissions and communities complained to FEMA that these didn't make sense, and then all of a sudden they paused the re-release of the maps. Now we're hearing those maps may be coming out like very late fall, early winter, so they should be coming out pretty soon. And we're starting to hear like I just heard there was a preliminary map released on the Deerfield, so they're starting to come into the state. We should see new like regulatory flood maps. Now, th this mapping we're doing is going to look a lot like it, but it might be a little bit different because we've taken the most current data, some of which they may not have used, and we've actually done some survey on the ground, which they don't have. So the models vary a little bit. I think ours may be a little better, but I'm biased. But theirs will be regulatory. So when they publish those maps, that's what like our floodplain managers have to work from.
Yeah.
And then, you know, we don't get those models readily. So now we have this model and we can change things. And I think we will be giving FEMA all of this information. And if they wanted to like bring it into their maps, they can do that. So most of our models end up in the hands of the state floodplain office. So they could, because the models are pretty much how those FEMA maps are made that we
Okay.
just walked
Terrific.
through with you. So yeah, it's sort of coordinated.
Well, great. Doug, you live in Morrisville?
Yeah, I'm a newer resident. I moved here in March from
Well,
Waterbury
welcome.
area.
And
Thanks.
I'd love to have a coffee with you sometime and check in on anything you want to talk about. It doesn't have to just be floodplains.
Sounds good.
All right. Really appreciate this, Tori and Roy and Doug. It's terrific to hear that, this information is being shared with the state and the state's sharing it with the feds and FEMA. So that alone is, I think exciting. So look forward to hearing more from LCPC about how Morristown can be involved in not only helping ourselves, but our neighbors along the Lamoille Basin.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Brent. I'll stop the recording too and share a copy with you, and it can also be requested through our office.
Appreciate it. Yeah, when you share it, do we have permission to like not only send it out to like the Conservation Commission, but also put it on our website?
Yeah, that'd be great. It'll be
Terrific.
on YouTube, so